Hello there, my RPG lovers, and welcome to another video. Blade of Darkness is a brutal action-adventure from 2001, developed by a small Spanish studio called Rebel Acts. When it first came out on PC back in the day, it was called Severance Blade of Darkness. This game sold around 300,000 copies by the end of 2001, which sounds great. Sadly, that was below Rebel Acts' expectations. The game failed to become popular mainly due to bad marketing, according to Wiki. It also proved to be too difficult for many players, and the lack of multiple difficulty settings was apparently another issue. I guess people back then still didn't hear about the expression, get good. All jokes aside, we could definitely claim that Blade of Darkness was a pioneer within the Souls-like genre. It has many similar features and mechanics, which can be used to describe a modern Souls-like RPG. Very satisfying and brutal combat with many different playstyles, vertical level design with a bunch of shortcuts and secrets, and of course the infamous difficulty. However, Blade of Darkness was far from a perfect game. The boss fights are underwhelming and you can count unique bosses on your one hand. The level design was exceptional, except a couple of specific levels that have a very annoying design. The controls take a while to get used to, they can feel very stiff, which makes the gameplay janky. To put it simply, sometimes your main enemy is going to be the control scheme. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Blade of Darkness has been released on GOG, Steam and all current gen and last gen consoles, including Nintendo Switch. I just finished another playthrough of this game and I'm very eager to talk about it on the channel again. I said again because I covered Blade of Darkness in one of my hidden gems or trash videos. I always wanted to make a dedicated video about this game because it definitely deserves one. So sit back, grab some drinks and let me tell you about my experience with the father of Dark Souls. Blade of Darkness doesn't want to waste your time with long intros or cutscenes, it immediately throws you in the character selection screen. You can choose between 4 different characters and once again I started playing with the Barbarian because I really like him. I also tried out Zoe the Amazon and she's so much faster and agile, it's almost like we're playing a totally different game. The Barbarian might have the highest skill cap because of his slower playstyle, but don't quote me on that since I didn't play with other classes that much. Anyway, there is a tutorial that you definitely should go through if this is your first time playing the game. For some reason, this game introduces you to a mechanic that you're almost never going to use. Using the torch to burn some boxes seemed kinda cool and I expected to see this mechanic being used on different levels, but that never happened or I just missed it somehow. Barbarian is using two-handed swords and axes, but he can also use a bow and plenty of other melee weapons as well as shields. However, his special moves can only be performed with two-handed swords and axes. Let's talk about the controls and how the game plays in general before we talk about special moves and combos. Like I mentioned before, it really takes some time until you get used to the clunky control scheme, but when it clicks with you, I wouldn't be surprised if you think Blade of Darkness has the best melee combat system ever. Yeah, I'm not exaggerating at all, the combat system is extremely satisfying when you get the hang of it. The remastered version of the game included the option to play with a controller, and that's how I played the newest playthrough. I recommend playing with a controller actually, even though the controller has the same issues like mouse and keyboard. Moving Barbarian around feels like you're driving a car, but his jumps are pretty long and he's not that slow when you put your weapon away. His slower, more methodical playstyle definitely complements the melee combat system, but it can be a bit clumsy and annoying in specific situations. Target lock works fine in 90% of situations, but if you're not careful it can also get you killed. It's pretty essential in fights because it allows you to flank the enemy by dodging or simply moving to the side while the enemy is performing their combo. Each and every melee attack in this game has long animation locks for you and the enemy. The melee combat is all about timing and good positioning. This creates a very steep learning curve because the game punishes you for almost every mistake you make in combat. If you get lucky, the enemy can miss you a lot, but even when you successfully perform your combos, you can easily die. Another enemy can land a hit on you or even interrupt your combo just before it was going to connect. It's very frustrating sometimes. Sometimes it doesn't make a lot of sense because I could swear I hit the enemy, but I didn't. Although to be fair, the hitboxes in this game are pretty damn good most of the time. In fact, they are so good that you can clearly see how and when you can mutilate your enemy. As you can probably tell by now, Blade of Darkness is a great mutilation system that allows you to chop your enemies in pieces. From the smallest to the biggest enemy in the game, you will put all of them to the chopping block. This doesn't exclude your character, by the way. It's still insane to me how well the system works and looks in this old ass game. How the hell we can't have something similar in modern action adventures and RPGs? I mean, some of them have mutilation systems, but I can't think of a new game that does it better than Blade of Darkness. It's so satisfying and rewarding, and it complements the combat in a big way. Nothing feels better than hitting a powerful combo that ends with a bunch of limbs flying around. And it's not just some random bullshit as well. It makes perfect sense because the direction of your attacks determines what limbs get cut. If you don't think that's cool, I don't wanna be your friend. It really never gets old. I could do this all day without getting bored. I also love how you can see the damage you deal on some enemies, like big scars on their back, for example. It's a good indicator that you're very close to putting that enemy to the chopping block. To go back to combat mechanics, it's one of those games where you can get killed easily by the weakest enemy in the game if you're not careful. Yeah, sounds familiar? I would say it's even more punishing than Dark Souls games when it comes to this, but then again, it's very easy to kill the most basic enemies in game. The problem is when they come in greater numbers. I used to try and brute force a lot of these fights on my first playthrough by performing long and powerful combos. But this time around I decided to be a bit smarter in fights like this. There is friendly fire in the game and it's pretty easy to make enemies hit each other. Enemies can even start fighting between themselves after they hit each other a couple of times. You can use this to your advantage a lot, especially before some bigger fights. Come to think of it, that's something I didn't really like in this game because it felt a bit cheap. You will get to fight a lot of smaller enemies at once, and right after that you get to fight a big boss. And I'm using the term boss very loosely here because that's one of the biggest weaknesses in the game. You can count all unique bosses on one hand, and the game repeats some boss fights a couple of times while not adding a single new mechanic. That was the case for the vampire dude at least. He has a very annoying mechanic to teleport behind your back and just spam it like crazy. Blade of Darkness saved the biggest bosses for the end, which makes sense, so it's not exactly without proper boss fights. But the first half of the game really suffers from the lack of proper boss fights. It also uses elite enemies as bosses, which is fine when it happens the first couple of times, but it gets annoying later on. Blade of Darkness really suffers from the lack of enemy types, but on the bright side, the existing enemies are well done. Their attack patterns are easy to predict and avoid, but if you get too confident, you can lose your head very easily. It makes the combat feel fair and satisfying at the same time, which is not that easy to achieve. And let me remind you about the age of this game. It's really crazy how good this combat system feels even after so many years. I mean, sure, it takes some time to get accustomed to clunky controls, but it's totally worth it if you ask me. The healing system in Blade of Darkness is very limited. Yes, there are health potions you can pick up from enemies and crates in the game, but it's quite rare. It makes the game a lot more difficult than it actually is, and I wouldn't blame you if you don't like how this works. However, I think the lack of healing is what makes you play more carefully, because you simply can't afford to take a lot of damage. All of these levels will take you from 30 to even 50 minutes to complete, depends on how you play and if you want to find every secret. So if you lose a lot of health after you just started, you will be forced to play through the whole level like this. You will find at least some potions on enemies, but you would definitely make the game a lot harder for yourself, so it's better to restart or reload a save. Most potions won't even heal you completely, so you have to be careful unless you want to fight stronger enemies with 20% of your health. This happened to me a couple of times on some levels and it was very frustrating, but you're the only one to blame in such situations. Yeah, it's not me, it's you. You little bitch. Arrows are a little bit OP in this game, especially on early levels. This level was particularly annoying because of the archer NPCs. Now let's talk about special attacks and combos. Most weapons you find in the game have special attacks, which require specific character level. These attacks are performed with different button inputs that you can find in the menu. Now, you have standard combos for weapon types like swords and axes for barbarian. But most weapons also have unique attacks which deal the most damage. These attacks have a red visual effect at the end of the combo. Some of them have a very easy combo which only require a couple of inputs, while others have very long combos. I didn't find those very long combos that useful, even though they deal a ton of damage. It goes back to my problem with the clunky controls, but you will probably do much better in combat if you just keep it simple. You will find stronger weapons on all levels as you progress, so I recommend sticking with simple 1-2 combos. The thing is, once you feel the damage of those special attacks, you will want to use them all the time, which will get you killed a lot. For example, this axe has a very strong special attack, which is also very easy to execute. Even though I found stronger weapons later on, I would switch back to this axe and use it on elite enemies and bosses because of the special attack. It's not worth using all the time, but it works like a charm in those situations. This creates a very interesting dynamic in combat actually, and it's all up to you. You have more than enough weapons and combos, so pick something that works for you. The energy bar is basically your stamina, but it's not as punishing as in modern Souls-likes. You need the full bar of energy to perform these longer combos, so you can't really spam them all the time. The bar regenerates quickly though. The barbarian can do a little step dodge that you're probably going to spam a lot, as you should. It's such a huge difference compared to Zoe, the Amazon, because she has a full-blown dodge that covers a lot more terrain. Not to mention her speed and agility, it's like you're playing the game in ×2 speed. What I found amazing is the character progression, which somehow manages to feel great. I mean, this game doesn't have any special character abilities to learn or skill trees like in RPGs. All you get is those unique weapon attacks, and of course, all classes feel very different to play. I know I complained about the lack of enemy types, but there's some great sense of progression here. You go from being very careful when fighting these little enemies, to being very confident that you can butcher a couple of them at once with no issues later on. Now let's talk about the level design for a minute.
In Ephira, the mad King Azud ordered his dwarven artisans to build a temple guarding the tomb of his wife, the great Queen Asha, and all her secrets.
If you're a huge fan of Souls-likes, you will definitely enjoy going to these levels in Blade of Darkness. There's a lot of vertical exploration, shortcuts, secrets to find, and even invisible walls. All characters start on different levels, but they end up progressing through the same path. You sometimes have the option to choose between 2 levels, and I'm pretty sure you don't get to see all levels because of this, but I might be wrong. While I think the level design is absolutely amazing, it can be frustrating sometimes because you have no idea what to do or where to go. It can make you go in circles a lot, especially on earlier levels, because you maybe never saw a passage you can enter, or you don't remember which door you need to open with the key that you just got. Don't ask me how I know. Even so, I love this kind of level design in games, so I won't complain a lot. The only level that I hated is the Oasis. It was far too confusing for me, and it's full of narrow passages that just makes the exploration more annoying. To make things even worse, you have to gather a couple of keys in specific order, otherwise you will instantly fail in this chamber and there is nothing you can do about it. The second part of the level is more bearable, but the first one is pretty bad. My favorite levels are the mines, the fortress of Tel Halaf, and the temple of Al Farum. The fortress is an early level in the game and it can be confusing to explore until you figure out the layouts. Exploring the roofs on this level was pretty cool because you feel like you're going off the beaten path, even though it's obviously designed to be played like this. Funny thing about the mines is that I hated this level on my first playthrough, but on my second playthrough it became one of my favorites. You have to collect 3 different gems in order to open a specific passage and progress further. There are a couple of different paths to take and it can be the most confusing level in the game. But this time around I came prepared, so I memorized a couple of these places, which made it way more enjoyable to explore. The Temple of Alpha room felt like it tried to break the monotony a little bit, with a slightly different vibe and atmosphere inspired by ancient Egypt. It's a bit annoying to find the bottles you need, and I mentioned the stupid arches before on this level, but I think it's a pretty cool level in general. Speaking of which, all of these levels in the game have very simple objectives. It feels like most levels have two different stages. The first one requires you to explore every nook and cranny in order to find something that you need to progress forward, like a specific passage or a key. There is some light platforming and puzzles as well. You can trigger some traps, usually in those secret areas I mentioned, but they are pretty easy to deal with. I really enjoyed finding secret areas, but I think I found way more in my first playthrough. You can find some armor pieces for your character on specific levels, and they are usually slightly hidden. Blade of Darkness has a dark fantasy setting, surprise surprise. Even after all these years, it still manages to create an amazing immersive experience.
On his return from the War of the Sword, Fayir was greeted with celebration and appointed king at the base of the mountain.
The dark atmosphere of this game is so well done. The music and sound effects are one of the big reasons for that, obviously, and even after 24 years, it's still so atmospheric and immersive. The graphics are obviously very outdated, but the remake made the game look as good as possible. You can play in very high resolutions with no issues, and I didn't have a single bug, glitch or a crash. The remake works flawlessly for me. The story in this game is delivered in small chunks. If you really want to know what the hell is going on in this game, you have to do some research. I'm not even sure if there is a proper story in Blade of Darkness, it's more like little lore pieces that you can put together.
After defeating the enemy, Ereshkigal's life withered away from the perilous wounds he suffered in battle. His devoted friends carried his body to the temple of the goddess and entombed him there.
And that's pretty much everything I wanted to talk about. Blade of Darkness is a very special game, and ever since I tried it out for the first time, I wanted to replay it. I'm glad I finally did, because now I love it even more. It's easy to recommend, and it works out of the box on modern PCs thanks to the remastered version. I'll have a GOG affiliate link for the game if you want to buy it over there. Anyway, tell me, did you play Blade of Darkness and did you like it? Leave a comment down below. If you enjoyed the video, leaving a like and subscribing would mean a lot. I'm getting very close to 100k subscribers, which is insane, and I still can't believe it. Massive thanks to all of my channel members and Patreons, and if you want to support the channel like the people you see on the screen, you can find all the links down below. That will be all, and I'll see you in the next one.